everyone, my name is Amber, welcome back to my channel. This is my September wrap up. I actually had a pretty good reading month in September. Most people seem to have been in a reading slump, but I actually had a really good time. I read a grand total of 12 books. My average rating was only 3.2, which means that I read a lot of 3-star reads, I think, kind of middle of the road books. Nothing really was outstanding, but nothing was particularly terrible either. Actually, I did read one-star read, but that's the only one. I only had one really bad one. I did miss a few books that I had put on my September TBR, so I didn't do as well in that regard as I had hoped. That doesn't mean it was a bad reading month, it just meant that I added a few different things to my TBR and I didn't get to quite as many as I wanted to, but that's fine. I think I'm just going to start with the first book that I read in September and then go through in order, because ranking them and stuff is just a bit tricky, so I don't really want to do that. So the first book that I finished in September was The Sword of Kaigen. This is a self-published book by ML Wang. This is her first adult book. It's a fantasy book set in the same universe as her YA books. She has written 2 self-published YA books, I think, and it's going to be an unfinished series. She's basically said on her blog that she doesn't really want to go back to it. Although she might do in the future, I just don't think it's on the cards. This story follows a family called the Matsuda family. They live in the mountains and they're basically kind of very committed to the empire to protect it if it ever goes to war. They're called the Sword of Kaigen because they're like the country's first defense. At the very beginning of the book, a character from elsewhere arrives and makes the other characters start to question things, particularly the teenage boy who he is friends with, because he's kind of like, you do realize the government are using you, and so this kind of starts a whole like internal conflict for the characters. It doesn't help that the teenage boy, whose name I can't remember, his mother already doesn't really believe in the cause either. She's just kind of there because it's kind of expected of her to settle down and start a family, and that's what she has done, although she is a very powerful warrior. And then of course war breaks out, characters have to fight. I found this book to be very, I guess, confusing in its pacing. Going into it, I thought it was going to be very emotional. I was going to fall in love with these characters, particularly the main lady, whose name, again, I can't remember, Misaki. I thought I was going to really connect to her, because those kinds of stories where the woman starts out as a warrior and has a lot of potential in that field, becomes a mother and is kind of stagnated, I always really like that. But in this one, I don't think it really worked very well. But the pacing is the part that really threw me off. So the big battle happens within the first 200 pages. After that, it's just the aftermath of the battle and nothing else really happens, and that's quite frustrating because I thought this was going to be a full-on like long war epic, but it wasn't, and I kept waiting for something else to happen and it didn't, which was really frustrating. The battle itself was quite well written and really cool. I just wasn't a massive fan of the writing style overall, particularly because massive parts of this were italicized. So the characters speak several different languages in this book, and obviously it's written in English, so the author had to find a way to differentiate between the languages and tell us which languages the characters were speaking. And I think italicizing the language which the characters are speaking that isn't like their native tongue would have been okay in short bursts, but sometimes there were just pages and pages of italicized text, and I hate that. I really don't like that. It hurts my eyes, hurts my brain. So I feel like she could have just left it at points and just let us kind of infer from the context what language they were speaking, or say such and such said this in Kaigenese or whatever, and differentiated it that way, because it really didn't work with the story. I didn't like it, and it was the entire way through. So I am a little bit disappointed by this one. I didn't hate it. I think I gave it 3 stars. I gave it 4 stars to start with, and then upon like further reflection I gave it 3. I was quite disappointed because I was sure I was going to love this one, but unfortunately I didn't. I'm not sure if I will read anything else by her. I don't particularly feel the need for a sequel either, so yeah, I think I'm kind of done for now. I then read The Final Gambit, which I gave 3 stars. This one is the 3rd book in the Inheritance Games trilogy. In the first one, the main character Avery inherits a ton of money and a whole estate from this billionaire, and she doesn't know why, because she's not related to him as far as she's aware. She doesn't know who he is, but she has been named in the will. As part of the condition, she has to turn 18 first of all, and then also she has to have lived on the estate for an entire year in order to get that money. I only gave this one 3 stars. I really enjoyed the trilogy up to this one, and now it's just kind of like okay. I feel like the author introduced things that should have been introduced in the 2nd book in this one, and it felt a little bit convoluted, and like some things had come out of nowhere, which was a shame. There weren't really many hints to it in the first 2 books, and I feel like a 3rd book in a trilogy has to be about sort of wrapping everything up and bringing all the threads together rather than introducing new threads halfway through. So yeah, this one was okay. I didn't really care for the love triangle either, even though it wasn't really a love triangle, but people seem to be turning it into one, including the author in the second book, weirdly, but I didn't count it as a love triangle, and it was fine. 3 stars. I of course will carry on reading this author's books because I do enjoy them, especially her thriller mystery books. I then read Queen of Coin and Whispers, which is another adult fantasy book. Although there isn't any fantasy in this, it's just set like in court, and it made me question like what we actually categorize as fantasy. I gave this one 3.5 stars. This is another one that I was a little bit disappointed by. So I read the first 100 pages and could not put it down. I was really intrigued, but then it did start to drag, and I didn't really like the relationship between the 2 main women. One of them is the queen and the other is kind of the master of whispers, like a spy master sort of thing, and I don't really feel like the master of whispers did much whispering. I was expecting the story to get really stuck into the spying aspect of things and hearing rumors and whispers and things and saving the queen's life and putting things together, but there really wasn't much of that, and the character who was thrust into that role had no experience anyway, so it felt like just a way to get the 2 main characters together, and it wasn't even a slow burn. So I didn't love it, but I did really enjoy the political stuff. That was fun to read about, especially in the first like 150 pages. It was really good, and then it started to drag a little bit because I wasn't getting what I expected or wanted out of it. I then read The Cove, which is an adult mystery thriller sort of thing. It's not very thrilling or mysterious. I gave this one 2 stars. I've now returned it to the library. I really didn't like it. I also had a copy from NetGalley, I think. This one is about 2 couples, and they go on holiday together to an island, and then something mysterious happens on the island, and I'm still not really sure what the point of the mystery was meant to be. It was all very boring, so I gave it 2 stars. I don't really have much to say about it. The characters were all freaking annoying. They're all cheating on each other and all keeping secrets from one another, and that's not something that I really love to read about when I already know it's a secret. If it's a secret to me as well, then that's fine and it becomes a twist, but I don't like it when I can read about all the different character points of views and the secrets they're keeping. It's really frustrating to me. The mystery also didn't get started until about 150 pages in, and for a thriller or mystery book, that's not okay. I need a faster pace than that. I then reread the 5th season finally, and I'm going to carry on with the Obelisk Gate in October. I gave this one 4 stars again. I think I gave it 4 stars last time. I felt exactly the same about it as I did last time. I loved reading about the characters in this and their relationships with all the other characters, and also the twists towards the end. That was really good. I'm really excited to see where this trilogy goes. I have to admit, I did start to skim read some parts of this that I remembered really well from my first read. That's not a negative or anything, it's just my memory, you know, caught up with me, and I did a good job of remembering what had happened. So I gave this one 4 stars, really enjoyed it. It's epic fantasy. I then read Kingdom of the Cursed so that I could recap it for Recaptions. This is the 2nd book in this trilogy. I don't know if I'm going to carry on with the trilogy now that I've recapped it. I was a bit disappointed by this one. I only gave it 3 stars, and I had previously heard that this book in particular becomes more new adult than young adult, which was definitely what the first book was. So I was prepared for the steamier scenes, but this entire plot was just like a romance book and I didn't really like it. It was more like a romance with paranormal elements than paranormal romance or paranormal book with romance thrown in. So I didn't love it. Gave it 3 stars. The plot itself was predictable and boring, and there was a twist towards the end, and I thought we already knew this from the first book, but apparently we didn't. Apparently it was a massive surprise to the main character, so I was a bit confused there. I don't know if I'm going to carry on with the trilogy. It depends how well it ends. I'm not particularly connected to any of the characters. In case you don't know what it's about, the main character in the first one is a witch, and her sister is killed because she makes a deal with some demons or something, or gets involved with some demons and is killed by them. And the main character meets one of the princes of hell called Wrath, and they try and figure out what happened to her sister. It's an interesting premise, but this book really lets it down. I'll be interested to know if you've carried on with the trilogy yet. I know the 3rd book only just came out, but I do want to know if it kind of holds up, if it wraps up well, if it's even the final book in the trilogy series. I don't know. Then I finally read Edge Dancer by Brandon Sanderson, which is a novella in this compendium. Is that what it's called? It's within this book called Arcanum Unbounded. It's book 2.5 in the Stormlight Archive, and I really need to read Oathbringer this month, or part of it. It was finally time for me to read Edge Dancer. I gave that 3 stars. I don't love short stories, and I do tend to prefer Brandon Sanderson's short stories or novellas to other people's because I'm already connected to the world, and I think he usually does a good job. But we've already met the main character from Edge Dancer in a previous book. I felt like I didn't really gain much from reading this novella. I could have just had that part introduced in Oathbringer, in my opinion, if that made any sense at all. I'm trying to get my thoughts out and I'm struggling. So I don't think it needed to be its own short story, although I did read Brandon Sanderson's like author note and I know why he wanted to do it that way. I just don't think it was entirely necessary. So I gave that 3.5 stars. It was enjoyable but not the best. I then read The Only Good Indians and I gave it 1 star. I really didn't like this one. So in this one, a group of friends kill an elk, a pregnant elk, and a few years later they are haunted by an elk and they start to be killed off or like haunted one by one, and we follow each of the friends. And I loved the sound of that one. I thought it sounded really, really good. The whole concept of being haunted by an animal that they've killed is fantastic to me as a vegetarian. This wasn't written very well. The writing itself was very dull and boring. The dialogue was a bit off for me. It didn't really feel like natural dialogue. I'm quite picky with dialogue in books anyway, but then also we didn't get the same amount of time with each main character, point of view character, the people who had killed the elk. The first one dies in the prologue, so it's not a spoiler. And I thought that was going to be a setup to something really kind of epic, but it's kind of more so told in like short stories, because each character gets their own sort of short story on how they're dealing with the elk haunting, and then it kind of starts all over again, which means that the pacing is all over the place because it kind of builds up for one character, stops, and then starts again at the same slow pace for the next character, and I didn't like it. So I gave this one 1 star, unfortunately. There was also some weird stuff with basketball that I wish someone would explain to me, because I don't know why that was put in there or why it was necessary. So yeah, 1 star for this one. I'm unfortunately not a fan. If you didn't like this one but have enjoyed Stephen Graham Jones's other books, please tell me, because I'd be interested in checking them out. I'm not writing him off as an author for me just yet. I would like to check out maybe My Heart is a Chainsaw perhaps, or tell me if you think I should read his other books or if they're all kind of like this one. I also read I Shot the Devil, which I received from NetGalley but I also picked up from the library. This is a thriller book about a true crime writer or reporter, journalist sort of thing, and she goes back to her old hometown to investigate a case that happened there. And what happened was a bunch of teenagers at the time were out in the woods, and one of them kind of went like crazy, lost his mind and killed another one. It kind of plays on the whole sort of like satanic ritual sort of thing, and everyone thinks it's because the murderer was worshipping the devil, and the main character wants to look into this, especially because she kind of used to be friends with this group before she moved away. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. It was a very good thriller. It was very intriguing. It had a lot of characters that were sort of interwoven, like small town drama sort of vibes. The character did do stupid things, but I honestly didn't care. I was enjoying the plot enough and the mystery enough to not be bothered by that. I think characters have to do stupid things sometimes, otherwise there wouldn't be a story. I read Mina and the Slayers, the sequel to Mina and the Undead. Oh my god, there's some like brownie on this cover. This is the second in a paranormal YA series about Mina, and it features vampires. It's really, really cool. I gave this one 3 stars, which I think is the same rating that I gave Mina and the Undead, the first book, when I first read it, and then I bumped it up to a 4 star upon a reread. So I'm gonna have to reread this one I think next year. I don't know when or if the 3rd book is coming out, but I definitely want to reread this before and then recap it and kind of get more into the world. I really enjoyed following Mina again in this one. I don't think the beginning or middle were as intriguing as Mina and the Undead were when she was just sort of discovering New Orleans. Now that the character's more settled and has more things going on that we already knew about from the first book, I didn't find it as engrossing, I don't think, but I am going to reread it. I then read The Atlas 6, which I gave 3.5 stars. I didn't love this one. It's not amazing, but it was definitely enjoyable. So this one follows 6 people who have extraordinary powers. They're kind of like superhuman, but this book calls them magicians because it's dark academia and that's what you do in that genre, I think. And they're kind of like the best in their field, and this guy called Atlas is going around and gathering them and putting them all into this initiate program for them to study at the Library of Alexandria, which is now in the UK. The writing in this is very, very pretentious, which is probably why I didn't get on amazingly with it. To be honest, I didn't really care about any of the characters apart from maybe 2 of them, like Libby and Parisa are the most intriguing. I was intrigued by the plot. I didn't really care for the one classroom scene I think that we got. I don't really know where the author is going entirely with the sequel, but yeah, I'm intrigued enough to read the next book, The Atlas Paradox, and I was kept very, very intrigued. I think I only got bored for like maybe 100 pages out of 530, so that's not too bad really. My main issue with this was the pretentious writing, which I think I probably should expect from this genre now. I just don't think it's entirely necessary. I don't know, I just don't love reading about snobby students, I think is what it is. Another gripe I had with this was that the bisexual woman, she's not painted in the best light, and she's shown to, she uses her good looks and sex to her advantage basically, which is absolutely fine, like there's nothing wrong with that, but she's the only bisexual character in the book, and I do find that bisexual characters, particularly female bisexual characters, are portrayed this way, and they sort of like sleep around and use sex a lot to their advantage, or it's painted negatively and they sort of tend to be like cheaters or whatever. So I didn't love that she was the potentially only bisexual main character, at least the only confirmed one, because it was just such a stereotype, and I hope that the sequel proves me wrong with that and improves upon things. So that was my only major issue with it, other than the pretentious main characters. And then finally I read The Rearranged Life of Una Lockhart. This is called Una Out of Order in the US, I think. I gave this one 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. So this is written by a Ukrainian author who grew up in Brooklyn, and the majority of the book does take place in New York as well. It tells the story of Una, who on her 19th birthday, on New Year's Day, she is transported to her 51-year-old body, also on her birthday, and she comes to realise that she is going to have to live her life out of order. So she goes from 19 to 51 to like 27 or something, and nothing is in the correct order, which is very frustrating for her. She does leave herself little notes at the end of each year, but obviously she, the one that we're following, doesn't know what's happening. So it's kind of like a timey-wimey time travel sort of thing, which I love. I really, really enjoyed it. I got very, very emotional towards the end. Kenzie honestly has my heart. He was a lovely character. I really loved the main character's relationship with her mother as well. I didn't so much love her sort of teenage crush, particularly towards the end. I felt like she could have maybe let that go, but everything was so like interlinked and interwoven, it made sense that what happened. It have to be very vague here, but yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one. If you like time travel and contemporary books, then I would recommend reading this. So those are all the books I read in September. Like I said, I had a really good reading month. There's nothing that I really regret reading. I'm glad I at least tried Stephen Graham Jones. Let me know what you read in September, how many books you read, if you're happy with your reading, what your average rating was, if you know. Let me know if you've read any of these books, we can have a discussion about them. And thank you for watching. I'll be back with my next video very soon. Bye!